Good afternoon, friends. It's wonderful to be together. It'd be wonderful if we could hug one another, embrace one another in this moment, but I'll take this. I'll take this Zoom connection with all of you. We thought it was important for us, your conference staff, your district superintendents, executive staff of the conference, and certainly I feel it is critical that we continue to connect with you and keep you informed of what we are doing to help us move in this time of COVID-19 with all of its impact. Because we are a connectional church, we have responsibility for one another. And certainly I feel that responsibility to help us stay safe, to be well, to follow those words that come to us from John Wesley of doing all the good we can, doing no harm, and staying in love with God. And we know that that means staying in love with one another as well. And not just one another, we who are United Methodist, but with every single one of our sisters, brothers, siblings in the world, because we all belong to God. And together we are a family, a human family together. And so I thank you for giving time to this moment of this special webinar in our efforts to keep you in the loop and feedback what we are hearing from you as well, your needs and your concerns. It's been a long time, hasn't it? It's been for the conference center staff and myself, district staff, district superintendents, and their administrative assistants. It's been since March 4th that we have been in remote places, isolated from one another because of COVID-19. The closing of our church buildings came not too many days after we had to close conference center and district offices. So we've been on a long journey. I'm so grateful to each of you, particularly to our pastors and to those of you in the laity who have responsibility for leading our local congregations, because you've taken this moment of working remotely, of trying to figure out how we are to be the church in this day and age. You've taken that to heart out of real concern for being in ministry, knowing that in all times, under all circumstances, we are called to continue being disciples of Christ our Lord, continue being his church, his body out into the world. And we know that when our communities hurt, they need the presence of the church. They need to hear that word of mercy and experience the compassion and love of God that certainly God chooses to extend in many ways. But we are so bold as to say that we believe that we are instruments of God's mercy and grace, compassion and loving care. And so you have persevered, and we are grateful, persevered in so many ways. We've been talking for a number of years now in the United Methodist Church about needing to be an adaptive body, and you have been an adaptive body, adapting to the new circumstances, moving from in-person worship to virtual worship, finding other ways to be in communication with those who are already in isolation because of age or illness or other circumstances. You've adapted and found ways to continue to feed the hungry and care for children. You've extended your care to essential workers in so many wonderful and amazing ways. I think we've learned a lot about what it means to be the church in this season, and even more what it will mean to be the church in the days and years to come. So I pray that we will continue to examine what God is teaching us in this moment and in this hour. We've been through some transitions over the last few months since March season, March the 4th and on, as we begin to be called by state and federal and CDC regulations to shelter in place. One of the early adaptations to sheltering in place meant figuring out what that actually meant. What did that mean? How far could we go? How could we go? What were we free to do? And your conference staff has worked very diligently to make sure that we gathered as much information as we could to share with you about that, about social distancing, and about the things that were possible and things that we were asked not to do and places we were asked not to go because we had a pandemic among us. Uh, that grave of a situation. Thank you again for following the orders of state government, county government, CDC, and those orders that we receive from federal government as well. Since then, we've also then gradually been told what new things we could do. One of the early things was that it was recognized that daycares and preschools, some of which are located in our local churches, were essential, that they were necessary to continue to meet the needs of persons, of families, of our communities. And so once again, with the assistance of pastors and experts in our daycare and preschool programs in our local churches, I learned there are many across our annual conference. We took the protocols given to us from the states where we serve and prepared protocols for those daycare and preschools. Thank you to those who helped us do that work. And then we were informed that drive-in church was possible. And so again, those pastors and others who were interested, not only interested, but felt they had the capacity and were at a place where they could move into doing that in a responsible place, became partners with conference staff in preparing guidelines, protocols for how to do that, even testing those protocols. More recently, we received the word that our churches, not only ours, but communities of faith, could begin to look at gathering in person, but again, under certain protocols. I will share that I am very grateful to Governor Newsom and his staff who have kept religious leaders like myself in the loop of what they're learning and what they're considering and what they feel that we are facing in this pandemic. If you've seen the graphs of California, unfortunately, we have not yet flattened the curve on this pandemic. Nevada is at a slightly better place. The fact that Nevada has these expansive areas of very little population. We have some of that in Northern California as well, but a slightly different setting when you compare one state to the other in terms of the density of population. But we've also kept abreast of what is coming from the governor's office in Nevada. But Governor Newsom has been very helpful in having religious leaders be in the loop, and they have sent us, his office has sent us periodic updates, even alerting us to when things would be changing. And so it did not come as a surprise when they alerted us to the fact that we could begin to look at opening up in-person worship. We had the opportunity, some of us, a small group of us, about 8 religious leaders in the state of California, had the opportunity to run through the entire document that the state of California had produced with CDC to help us prepare. It was a lengthy document. It took several hours to go through it. And I could begin to see as it was reviewed with us, with those state officials, that there were some things that were relevant for us, basic things, and then there were other things that applied to other religious gatherings, but not our own. And so I began to consider the fact that we would need to adapt those protocols for our setting. And so conference staff has been working on that. I also want to share that we have worked connectionally beyond our annual conference. Bishops across the Western jurisdiction have worked together on making determinations about how we care for our churches. Again, we are a connectional church. We work together. We care for one another. What happens in one congregation if it's big or small or a medium-sized congregation, it is our responsibility together to care for one another. So we have kept every single congregation in mind as we've worked together. One of the fruits of our collaboration connectionally as a jurisdiction has been to receive the incredible work of the Greater Northwest area, Bishop Stanovsky being the Episcopal leader there, Elaine Stanovsky. And we asked for permission to work with their document because it had the right lens. It had the right moral framework and Christian framework, and specifically Wesleyan framework for how we should approach moving into or relaunching in-person worship. So with deep gratitude to Bishop Stanovsky and the Greater Northwest area, we have produced a draft of what we believe are relevant protocols for returning to in-person worship for the congregations in the California-Nevada Conference. Now, we will be sharing the draft of those protocols as we end this webinar on this day. We would ask that pastors and a designated team that will be defined for you in just a moment begin to look at this draft protocol document to begin to prepare. We believe that there are things that you can begin to prepare to do even as we continue with our buildings closed through the end of June of this month. But there are things that you can begin to do to prepare for that possible day of reopening, which I hope will be July 1. But we are testing these protocols so that we can give you our best wisdom. I also want to say that some of you, pastors particularly, have expressed the concern that you do not believe that you are ready to reopen anytime soon. And I would say to you that with the support of the district superintendents and our extended cabinet and all the work that we've done, our conference lay leader who joins us in this work of responding to the COVID-19, I would say to you that we support you in not reopening, that you stay close to your district superintendent and continue to work with your district superintendent in terms of your ongoing ministry. But this is not a time in which we want to force any church or even office to open if you do not feel that you are yet ready to do it in a responsible way, in a caring way, with the ability to follow the required protocols, not our protocols, but the protocols of the state and of counties, and so, or the states and counties. I will share with you that there are counties who are not yet ready for in-person worship, and so you will need to work with your district superintendent to determine, to verify that your county indeed is ready to open for in-person worship. So you begin to see the many layers of work that must be done. Again, we've not yet curved or brought down that curve of the pandemic in the ways that perhaps other states have, and we need to be mindful of that. I think that Nevada is doing better than California, but we need to consider what is best not only for us United Methodist across Northern California and Northern Nevada, but in our communities. There's been also some pushback around whether we have sufficient faith in God in this moment. That pushback began day one. I began to receive notes and questions about whether we trusted God enough to keep us safe in this pandemic. The underlying message was we should continue doing what we do, how we do it, keeping our churches open, because we trust in God who will protect us. We trust in God. As United Methodists, we trust in God deeply and profoundly. But we also recognize that God has given us the gift of thought, the gift of intelligence, the resources to examine the present moment and through the guidance of the Holy Spirit to make the right decisions, to keep one another safe and healthy. And so while we trust in God, I believe that God is expecting that we will use the wisdom and gifts and grace that God has already endowed us with to make the decisions that we need to make to be a serving community that indeed cares for one another and everyone around us. There's also been a more recent push that has come all the way to my desk, and that is the push to join some Christians who believe that the reason for the kind of rules that we are under, the kind of requests that come from government for us to shelter in place, to keep our buildings closed, etc., is a political thing, and that we need to stand for the church above the authority of government. I would remind us that as United Methodist, we do not follow partisan politics. We all have a political party, I'm sure. We can have some interesting conversations about our political persuasion in terms of parties, but this is the church. And we as the church have a higher commitment. I would remind us again, as I have in the past, that we are citizens above all of the reign of God. And so we follow the rules of Scripture that call us to love God and love neighbor and to do all the good that we can in the world, seeking mercy and justice, compassion and care for everyone, particularly for those who suffer most among us, the most vulnerable, the poor, the immigrant, the imprisoned, the hungry, the thirsty, those who are left with no resources, that they are homeless on the street. And so we won't be joining any partisan, political partisan conversation on how we make our decisions or how we take action. We will continue to be the church, remembering that we are citizens of the reign of God above our citizenship in earthly nation states. And so we have much to do, friends. And on this day, I am going to be inviting Reverend Georgia Dominguez, our Executive Director for Connectional Ministries, who has been leading the work around the protocols for relaunching our churches, to run through the draft of the protocols with you. And then we will move into a time of Q&A. And hopefully this will help us just to all be on the same page. Hopefully we'll be able to answer questions that we've not thought of, and perhaps bring information to you that you have needed and wanted. And certainly we hope will help you prepare for the relaunching of In Worship service. So thank you for being on this call. I'm going to turn to Reverend Georgia Dominguez now to lead us, and I'll see you in a minute for Q&A.
Good afternoon. It's really good to be with all of you this afternoon. We are counting almost 400 people from California Nevada Conference with us this afternoon. And I think that this is an opportunity for this initial conversation about the relaunching of our in-person worship and other ministry activities. I will be presenting the draft protocol as we have worked so far, and also share some information about the work that we'll be doing in the next 2 weeks to test it. I want to also invite you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen for you to ask any questions as I'm making this presentation. Craig Brown will help us sort those questions, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. But we will also use your questions to create frequently asked questions page for our protocols that will allow us to respond these questions for other people to be able to watch. We will also try to post the video of this presentation in our website for others to access it and be able to watch it. And we will start the process of testing. We have been preparing for that. And in the next 2 Sundays, there are 8 churches in the Great Northern District and also on Central Valley District who will be testing these protocols, and we will learn from that experience. We had a meeting with all the pastors this Monday, the day before yesterday. They gave us some suggestions. They asked some questions. We did another revision of the protocol draft, and we will be posting the protocol draft on our website either tonight or early tomorrow morning, so everybody can access that and start reading, asking questions, and making suggestions. We are all together learning in this process, and we believe that this will be an opportunity for all of us to contribute to this common task that we have in the next months ahead of us. So I will start sharing my screen so you can see the presentation that was prepared for our conversation this afternoon. And we will also post this PowerPoint on our website so people can go through it, read, and also ask questions if needed. It is important to remember that we are in an ongoing process. As the bishop mentioned, the scenario is changing on almost daily basis. And it is important for us to be flexible, to really look into how we adapt. This is actually a version of this draft that we have worked and changed it a few times already in the last 2 weeks because of new information or other practices that we are learning about. Besides the work that Great Northwest area, Episcopal area did, which we also used in our protocols, we also consulted with many other annual conferences across the nation. Everybody is sharing information, what is working well for them, what is not, and we are trying to use all of the best practices in how we are going to offer some guidance and suggestions to the churches in the process. But it is important to also remember that we as United Methodists have a mission that is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And it's based on that mission that we do this work, that we are preparing to relaunch our in-person worship and ministry activities. This mission statement implies that we have love of God and our neighbors, and that we are doing this because we want to continue transforming the world. But as United Methodists, we also follow the 3 simple rules from John Wesley: to do no harm, to do good, and to stay in love with God. We believe that these 3 simple rules should always guide our work in this moment. Are we not only doing harm to our neighbors, but how are we doing good? How is the relaunching of our activities will do good for our communities? In all, we stay in love with God. Of course, if we are relaunching our ministries, we need to start with prayer. And this will be asked for every step of this journey to relaunch our ministries, to seek God's guidance for how we will best follow Wesley's 3 simple rules: to do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. But also we need to plan. We need to engage in mission and ministry planning about our church, and also be realistic, be honest, and creative to find the solutions that are adequate for our time at this moment. We also need to communicate. We need to be in conversation with our church members, with our communities, our members of our community, and we also need to consult with and submit our plans to the district superintendents. The district superintendent is your partner who will help to go over some of these questions and also share what other churches are doing so we can learn from each other in this process as well. And finally, we need also to be able to share our ministry plan with our congregations and also with our constituents and with the community as a whole. They need to know that we are doing this in a process of thinking together, learning together, but also in prayer and in responsibility with each other. There are many steps to organize relaunching of our in-person service and ministry activities. And you will see in the protocols that we are very detailed about all of those steps, providing some key actions that have to be taken. Also, we provide some guiding questions so you can think about some things that you may have not thought. But we start with organizing a team in the church that should include the pastor or pastors of the church, lay leaders, the chairs of trustees and the SPRC, any staff that you think it is important to be part of these conversations, the worship leaders, as well as leaders of other ministries in the local church. This team will be working together prior to the opening of these services, but also along the process, thinking how we can adjust as we go along. How do we do some of the changes, adaptations that may be necessary? This team will prepare a ministry plan that will include the in-person worship that you are planning to relaunch soon, but also the online worship. All of you or many churches have been doing online worship, and we know that this has been an opportunity to reach out to many other persons using the internet and different services. So to include the online worship in your plan will be necessary because you will need to organize how you're going to do both online as well as in-person worship following the guidelines from the state. But also look into remote group activities. There are many small groups that will continue to meet online, and it is important to have a plan or to include that in your plans as we move along. We also will need to start preparing for the other ministry activities because any church may have different ministries that you do in your location, in your building. And how do you include those ministry activities will be necessary for us to have a good sense of everything that's happening and provide the resources that you may need to relaunch those services. But how do we do this as United Methodists? It is our connectional responsibility to care for each other. We are a connectional church where we look to each other who are in different contexts. We are in urban areas, rural areas, in the mountains or in the forest areas or in Central Valley. We actually have a diversity across our conference that we are facing different realities. And we care for each other, so we are looking to support each other in this process. We are not alone as individuals or as individual churches. We are part of a community that is doing this together, and the conference and district leadership are partners with the local churches in doing this process. But we also follow the health authorities' guidance. As the bishop mentioned, it is not a matter of following partisan politics. It is actually following the science and the recommendations for public health protection. So we will follow the health authorities' guidance in every step that we are taking. We are using for these protocols both the state of California and the state of Nevada guidance. And we are also asking that each church look into their county health department guidance for any adaptation that they may need to do locally. It will be important to start by learning about your local and state guidance, and I assume that all of you have been looking for those. it will be important to adapt and apply that guidance to your particular context. Even our counties are diverse in their areas. There are urban areas in our counties and rural areas, and there are some variations of how we apply the guidance in those contexts. We also need to prepare in advance. And the other thing is we always need to remember that we can ask for help. And the conference staff, the district staff are ready to respond to your questions and to provide help. And if we need, we are also consulting with experts in different areas to provide guidance to the churches and in different contexts and questions we are also asking. But there are many steps to take in considering your planning. And you'll see that in more detail in the document when it's posted, but let's go through some of those important steps to consider the planning right now. There are high-risk populations, and those are defined persons who might be at a higher risk for severe illness from the COVID-19 virus. We know that all of us are at risk of contracting the virus, but many of us are at a higher risk for severe illness. And those are persons who are 65 years and older, persons with compromised immune systems, and persons with underlying medical conditions. We need to care for those persons particularly because they are at a higher risk for severe complications if they contract the virus. We also hear a lot about physical distancing. Maintain 6 feet apart from each other or from different groups that are not living in the same household. Do not gather in groups. To stay out of crowded spaces and to use face masks at all times following the CDC guidelines. Those are things that we do in order to minimize the risk of contact with the virus when we get together. And these are some things that we will observe in every step as we are doing our planning for the relaunching of our services. But of course, there is cleaning and preparing for the opening. Our churches have been closed for many weeks. So to do a cleaning is not just the regular cleaning that we need to do. And it has to be also different in terms of the frequency that we will be doing. It will be important to do a thorough cleaning before we relaunch in-person activities. So as you are preparing to do that, it is time to consider how are we going to do this thorough cleaning and how are we going to use the recommended products. The guidelines will provide links for you to look for the appropriate products to use depending on what you're going to clean in your churches and the different furniture that you have at our churches. It will be important to increase the frequency of cleaning of high traffic areas. It will also be important to ensure that sanitary facilities are operational and stocked. All of this will allow us to take a step further in our preparation. But one thing that we hear a lot, washing your hands with water and soap for 20 seconds, but also providing hand sanitizers, particularly for the moments that we will be together in the sanctuary for the worship. There are considerations in terms of our limits. How many people can fit in our buildings in this moment of reopening our services? The capacity limits are determined by the state, but also each county can have more strict capacity limits for our buildings. We know that California is asking that no more than 25% of the capacity or 100 persons, whichever is less, be allowed in the sanctuary for in-person worship. While Nevada has determined that we should limit to 50% of capacity of the buildings. Those capacity limits also apply to all the other rooms that we are using. So if there is a meeting to plan for the worship in a small room, you also need to look for the maximum capacity of that room and limit to 25% or 50% of that capacity in California or Nevada. And it is important also to consider utilizing a reservation system to limit the number of congregants if you expect that there will be more people coming than the capacity that you are allowed to accommodate in your building. Continuing, we talked about the live singing in the life of church. We United Methodists are a people who love to sing. Singing is part of our tradition, and we are at church also as a moment to sing together. But we also know that singing increases the likelihood for transmission from exhaled droplets. It is one way that people can get the virus if everybody is singing, and a person that may be infected may be expelling droplets contaminated with the virus into the air and causing the possibility of others to be contaminated as well. So we are recommending strongly that you consider discontinuous singing and group recitation. We are following the guidance from the state health authorities as well as from CDC. They also recommend that we consider discontinuing singing or to modify the practices such as limiting the number of people who will sing or to use face masks at all times. It is an opportunity for each church to talk what would fit better your context and how we can apply that those guidance, those orientations to the reality, to the context that you are dealing with. Communion is another important moment of our life as a church together. So we are recommending that we would offer preferably prepackaged communion sets. But for you to do that, you will need to also consider how you're going to distribute the communion elements and to order these communion elements ahead of the service. Now, this also is a process that each local church, depending on your size, how many persons come to the in-person worship to decide together what will make more sense for your reality and to include that in your plan that you will submit to the district superintendent. The offerings allow our church to continue in ministry, but we will have to discontinue for some time the passing of the offering plate. We don't want everybody touching that offering plate and the possibility of sharing the virus through that touching of the offering plate. So how are we going to create stations where people can deposit their offerings as well as maintain physical distancing? It is important to remember that the offerings and the tithings are how we allow our conference and our local churches to continue in ministry. So many churches have instituted online giving, and we are supporting any church that is still trying to do that. But we also know that many persons don't have access to those apps or means to provide online giving. So how are you going to plan that the offerings can be collected by your church in ways to sustain your ministry in this next phase? We will not be able to offer fellowship or coffee hour for some time. To offer beverages and self-service food is a risk that the states and also the counties are recommending that we do not do for some time. We will have to think about different ways to organize fellowship groups. And many churches are organizing those via phone or video conference. And people have been creative to how to come together, to pray together, even to study together the Bible, and also sometimes to have conversations about the sermons that we hear from our pastors. These are opportunities for us to be creative and also to look for each other in different ways. I mentioned that online services should be included in your plan, and online persons should continue because we know that there are some persons who are being advised to avoid public spaces because of their health conditions, their age, or any other conditions that it is safer for them not to be at a public space in contact with others until there is a vaccine available to all of us. We also know that some members may not feel comfortable to attend social gatherings yet. So how are we going to be pastoral and accompany those members in the process? That requires that we continue our online services as we are moving to in-person services as well. That means it's a little more work for us to do, but it is also an opportunity to use these services as an outreach to the community. We have heard from many pastors that there are many persons who are joining their online services who did not know the church or did not come to the church before. We are trying to use this as an opportunity to reach out and to use all of the technology available to us as a way to reach out to people who need to hear the message of Jesus Christ. Our ministry activities are not limited to the worship. There are many churches doing ministries in different ways in our locations, and we need to start planning for those as well. How are we adapting the guidelines for the unique ministries that you have at your local church will be needed as well? It is important to look for the specific guidelines from your state and also from your county. The states are providing industry-specific guidelines for children's programs, for camp ministries, for different food services or different social services. So you should look for those and include those in your plan, because this will allow us to see how you're doing your plans, but also will allow us to share with other churches ideas that you may have for your context that need and could be replicated in other places as well. Many of us have partnerships with other organizations that we need to coordinate, but we also need to communicate to our congregation, to our community, to the district superintendents. What are we doing in this new context? This will allow us to be in constant learning and in the process of engaging each other as a community of faith here in California, Nevada. Finally, I would like to talk about hospitality. We are opening our in-person worship because it is possible in some of our counties, in our states, to invite people back and do that in a loving way. But there are many things that you need to think ahead of time to plan for that. And you will see that, as I mentioned, in detail on the protocols that will be shared. But I would like to share a few ideas with you at this moment for you to start thinking. You will need to plan the arrivals at your church members to avoid agglomerations. The narthex, the entrance of the church, normally is an area where people congregate, and this will be necessarily a space for us to look carefully how we are going to plan the arrivals so that people can come to the church in a safe way without having to interact closely in a closed space. We also know that temperature checking is one of the recommendations from the states and health authorities about to go to another place. Before going to another place, how do you check yourself? So we are inviting the churches to consider asking the church members to take their temperature at home or to provide temperature checking at the arrival. In conversation with the 8 churches that will be doing the testing, we heard from different churches that they are choosing one or the other, depending on their context. Some people feel safer if we have the temperature checking at the arrival, so everybody is checked at that moment. Or others feel that it's better that each one of us take our responsibility to do that checking at home and stay home if we have a temperature, even if we don't have other symptoms of COVID-19. Speaking of symptoms, we also will need to assign volunteers to observe if any individuals start developing symptoms during the worship or during the activity that we are conducting. This can happen in the process that we are starting, that somebody starts coughing or sneezing or having some symptoms, and that we need to approach this person and say, how are they feeling? Can we take them to another place and take them to a place where they can feel better and consider returning to their home and not staying in the common space that we are worshiping. But this will be a responsibility for all of us to do together. We will need to use multiple doors for entering and exiting our buildings if there are multiple doors. We will need to think that the doors are also a place where people get in close contact. And how are we going to plan to move people in and out in ways that is safer for them? We also will recommend to consider dismissing the congregation with a moment of silent prayer before we go out. That allows people to have some staggered departures and not everybody leaving at the same time as we normally would do in regular times. But also to recommend that greetings and farewells take place outside of the building, following proper physical distancing, because at outside in open air, there is much less risk for contracting the virus. So we feel that this would be the moment for people to talk from a safe distance, greet each other, and also to think together how we will continue to be in ministry at this time. We will provide signs, but there are many signs already being provided from different state and CDC websites for you to post at your churches. And we believe that this will be important to constantly remind people of the instructions and the information that is necessary for people to be reminded of using their face mask, keeping the hygiene procedures, maintaining the physical distancing, and other things that we want to communicate without having to pass any materials to them. There are many additional resources, and the protocols will include the links to all of those resources that you see on the screen. And these resources provide you many more detailed protocols and guidelines that we have been using to create our conference protocols. You'll be able to consult those if you need more detailed information about cleaning, about disinfecting, about how to prepare your facilities for the ministries you will be doing. And finally, I want to say that we are doing this following John Wesley's 3 simple rules. Why we do this is because we do not want to do any harm. We do want to do good, and we want to stay in love with God. How are we doing this? By doing no harm, by doing good, by staying in love with God. What we will be doing is actively doing no harm. We will actively do good and continue to stay in love with God. This is a journey that all of us are in this together. And I thank you for listening to this. We will continue to listen to all of our conference concerns, questions, ideas, suggestions, so we can perfect these protocols. But we will continue in this work together, hoping that soon, very soon, we'll be able to be celebrating together the moment when we will be doing this in ministry work, all of us together. Thank you for listening, and we will now move to the questions that you may have asked during the time of presentation. Thank you.
All right, George, thank you very much. This is Craig Brown, and I'm going to be curating our questions for the bishop, George, and others as necessary. And let me launch this first question out. Are there other outside religious meetings or worship services allowed besides just drive-in worship? So if a congregation were to gather outdoors using chairs, is that available to them as an option for worship? Yeah, Bishop.
I'd like to respond to that. We have protocols now established for drive-in church. Someone did ask, I saw a question about who's doing it. We know that Fireball, Mendota, and Montague and Point Pleasant are following the protocols for drive-in church that we prepared and have placed up on our website. I understand that other churches began to prepare for that, but it got too hot too soon, and so they've stepped away from that. So right now, a drive-in church following the protocols and staying closed until we can determine how quickly we can move towards following the protocols that are being developed even now.
All right. The next question is, there are several questions about when various outside groups, including 12-step groups, would be able to come back to use church facilities again.
I'd appreciate Georgia taking that one on.
Thanks, Bishop. These particular groups are included in these other ministry activities. And there are from the state some guidelines for these specific services that the church provide. And we are asking through this process that the churches consider planning those activities as necessary. Not all of those will be allowed at this moment. But we will be looking into the specific ones like AAs or NA groups and follow the state guidelines for this moment. In all of that, we'll need to keep physical distancing and consider the different practices. But they should be included in the plan that the church will submit to the district superintendent for conversations.
All right, excellent, George, thank you. An easy question was being asked about where will these protocols be posted on the website? Are they gonna be on the main homepage, or are they gonna be put on the special COVID-19 page that the annual conference has?
I think that's a question for our Director of Communications, Selby Ewing.
Hi, friends. I'll say that they will be on the COVID-19 page, but there will be a link from the homepage, as there has been since, I think, March 5th, to the COVID-19 page. So if you go to our homepage and you look along the frame right column, you'll see the COVID-19 button, several buttons down. Press it and you'll see the protocols, both the draft protocols, the summary protocols, and all ancillary materials from these series of meetings there.
Excellent, thank you, Selby. I have another question that asks this. People have heard that there may be a requirement that people have to sign a waiver or somehow document their presence when they come to an in-person worship, which will also help for contact tracing if needed. If that's the case, do we have a template for a good waiver? And is there a way to execute that electronically, or does it have to be with pen on paper? A lot there, I know.
Bishop, I can answer that.
Please,
question.
yes, please.
What we are trying to do is to use the opportunity of the testing that will happen in the next 2 weeks to try some of these options. We are discussing with the pastors about the different possibilities, how to create a way to register the presence, that it will be important in case there are some people who get the virus for us to do contact tracing. But also the release of responsibility. We have been discussing with our conference chancellor what should be used, and there are some options that we are looking into, and we hope that with the testing that we'll have in the next 2 weeks, that will allow us to have one more one recommendation to offer to the church, or different recommendations that could be adapted according to your reality.
I would say that because of the comment that just surfaced on chat, we have been working with our insurance company as well. And so many layers of involving others with expertise, chancellor, insurance company, etc. So we are doing all of those things.
All right. A question has come up about resourcing. Has the annual conference, or is the annual conference able to help direct to a place that is a distributor of PPE or hand sanitizer? We have some of the churches in the Q&A that are voicing that they're having a hard time procuring these items in order to reopen. What resources does the annual conference have to perhaps help or point in the right direction?
We had a conversation about that in our executive team meeting recently, and we find that it would actually be more expensive and more difficult to try to buy things in bulk as an annual conference. But there's ongoing conversation about how do we organize so that such purchasing may happen more locally in districts by circuits, for example. So we are examining that.
And Bishop, if I could complement,
Please do.
we also know that several churches are finding alternatives or creative ways to procure those things. So as you share what your church has done, or if you know about other groups that have procured, we will try to facilitate to the whole conference the different options that we people are finding in different locations.
And the chat waterfall is a helpful resource. Many of you have been able to find PPE, hand sanitizer, cleaning products, and you're voicing in the chat where you have located those things, both online and in brick and mortar. So if you do have those suggestions, keep putting them in the chat as a resource to help churches that are still looking for those things. There's a lot of questions that have to do with singing, as you can imagine. So can you have an ensemble maybe do some singing? If the congregation can't, if the congregation does want to sing, does it help to wear a mask? You can go any direction you want with that question. There's probably about 20 of them with regard to singing in the queue. So anything more you can help us clarify on that, I think folks would find helpful.
Bishop, if you'd lead off, yes.
Yes. This was a very important conversation we had on Monday evening with all of the pastors of the 8 churches, plus the district superintendents, our lay leader, Michelle Pope, and Sonia Ed Bennett, and myself. And because these churches have started preparing in the last few weeks, these pastors were also able to help us research some of these concerns and solutions that are coming. So we are looking into resources that the United Methodist Church is offering for the whole denomination, but we are also looking for some experts regarding singing and congregational singing about how to use some different practices. We are receiving those yesterday and today from these pastors, and we will be able to incorporate more specific suggestions in our draft protocol as soon as we review those. But this is where we will need some creativity and some innovation at our local churches to offer alternatives for the singing that will allow us to be celebrating and joy together as we come together.
All right. I have a couple of questions here about the serving of communion. So let me give you the questions. It helps kind of frame where they're coming from. One congregation is asking, can we pre-package our own elements for communion? In other words, prepared by someone in the church that's pre-packaged for everyone. Or perhaps is it possible to have each family unit or household bring their own elements that could be blessed as part of communion? So going to put somebody's sacramental theology to the test.
So there are persons offering information about where they've received elements. I understand that to be some of the responses. But Georgia, you've been working through those protocols with the team.
Yes, Bishop. And what I want to share is there is a recommendation about pre-packaged communion elements, but also there are possibilities in the different guidelines about each family bringing their own elements or to prepare them in a safe way. I think that this will also depend on the context of the local church. How large is your worship? How many people will be taking communion? Are you able to prepare them ahead of time and have them distributed across the sanctuary so people don't have to be touching this common distribution table or set? So we believe that this is also an area where we need to look for the guidelines and find the solution that most practically adapt to our each one of our contexts. We are looking into some of these recommendations, and we'll try to perfect and update the draft as we receive them as well.
All right, good. I'm going to circle back to singing for just a moment. There was a question about ensemble singing, and I'm not sure if that means choir or not, but is an ensemble singing appropriate if they're physically distant, not wearing a mask, you know, away from the congregation? Is that recommended, or is that spoken to in the protocols at all?
I want to say that it is spoken to in the protocols, and George spent significant time addressing this particular concern. He's also spoken about trying to get best practices from across the country. I would remind us that in the West, the early cases around contamination and contracting COVID-19 came from choirs. And that's a concern, came from groups preparing from the depth of their heart to sing, and then many of them contracting the illness and then giving it on to church members. So I hope that we'll remember that we'll look at that, because there are many news articles written up about that. There is the tension of our desire to share our joy and our praise to God, but when it possibly could hurt another, I think we have to lean towards not hurting others. There is the study that has shown that some of us are carrying the COVID-19 virus unaware. And so I would lean towards being safe and careful, not thinking just about what we are accustomed to and yearn for so desperately in this moment in terms of our music, but to think about the fact that we're still in a pandemic. I saw something in the chat that said, we're going to bring back our bells and we're going to practice social distancing. What a marvelous sound that brings to my ears even now. There are other ways. We may need to be a meditative group in this time with music playing in the background, listening to hymns for the sake of reflection and for contemplation while we get to a better place in terms of this terrible illness.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. There's a process question that I would like to hear y'all speak into. A few people have asked it. So if we're going to be testing the protocols this Sunday and next Sunday, talk a little bit, if you would, about the process of revision. So how often will the protocols be revised, and will they be revised in time for potentially a July 1 opportunity to return to in-person worship?
I do want to turn to Georgia on that, since he's leading the process.
Thanks, Bishop. And this is a very pertinent question. We are engaging the 8 churches on the 2 districts as a team that is working with us, and we will, after this first Sunday, when 4 churches will do their in-person worship testing of the protocols, we will meet on Monday to collect the results and the assessment, what worked well, what didn't. And then we are going to do another one on Sunday the 21st, and again on Monday. We'll come together and see what did we learn after 2 Sundays, and be able to incorporate any of those learnings into the protocols. We will be adapting and revising these protocols as often as needed. I mentioned to these pastors, we know and we hear that from the state authorities that we are not necessarily on one direction about reopening. There could be a second wave that would require us to step back into more closings again, and we need to be prepared for those. So the revision of the protocols will be done as often as needed to incorporate new learnings, new facts, new guidance from the states and also from different counties as we move on in this process and as we learn from each other.
Great, thank you, George. We have a few questions that have to do with the other programs that typically happen at a church when it has in-person worship. So some folks are asking, how do we do Sunday school for children, other children's ministries, childcare, nursery? How does that relate with the in-person worship gatherings?
Georgia, please.
Thanks, Bishop. Yes, and this is an important question. We had long conversations about this, and we are now recommending that this child care, nursery, children's or youth Sunday schools are not offered at this moment. To bring children from different families together in a place and knowing that young children should not be wearing masks. It's not safe for them, according to the CDC, to maintain social distancing with children is not as easy. And that would create an opportunity for these children to go back to their families and unknowingly to contaminate other persons in their families. So we are aware of this. We are recommending not to conduct this children's and youth ministries at this time, but we are hoping that soon there will be different guidance from the states that would allow us to do some adaptation on how to offer these services, but not at this moment that we are testing, or possibly not when we come to a more open in-person worship in beginning of July.
Very good, thank you, George. We have time for just a couple more questions, and the pace at which I can ask the questions is not sufficient for the number that are coming in. So there are still 72 questions in the queue. So let me get to these couple that I've seen that are really, I think, voiced by many and are important. Do the protocols address when we can resume weddings and life celebrations?
Yes, the protocols also include, and these are also guidance coming from both states, some recommendations regarding weddings, funerals, and other services that honor different moments or passage in life. And they also are under the same guidelines and restrictions in terms of space, how we are going to use the space, capacity. So this is part of the guidance from the states about place of worship, allowing some of these activities to start to resume, following the same guidelines for in-person worship.
All right, and another question somewhat similar to it. How will the guidelines address the ability to open our offices and facilities during the week as well?
The protocols are suggesting that we will start slowly by doing the process that is recommended for office space. We are at this moment also discussing the protocols for the reopening of the office in the conference center, as well as we are thinking together with the offices in the districts, and that should also apply to the churches. It will be important to consider what is the need for the reopening and what are the services that would be provided through those offices. There are other considerations to consider if you are receiving visitors or people who approach the church for different reasons. So These protocols that we'll be sharing are specific about in-person worship and other ministries, but we are starting to include some of the guidelines that pertain to the offices in our churches as they support those ministries and activities that are resuming soon.
All right, good. The last thing I'm hearing from a few folks here as well, the county guidance that each of our churches need to follow will vary greatly between, let's say, a county in the Bay Area or a much more higher concentration of people versus our more rural areas of the annual conference. Who is the primary interpreter of that county's guidelines? Is it the pastor that secures that, the superintendent that secures that, the church's team is purposed with doing that work? What are the mechanics of that?
I want to speak into this question, and I want to start from a place of another question that was raised because it's relevant. The question that was raised that I saw on the chat line was, we've prepared our own protocols. We have nurses. That's a really wonderful thing to have a team of nurses. And so they are wanting to go directly to their county and get it approved and then just submit it. I want to share that that's wonderful work, and I'm sure that that's going to be very relevant in working to meet the protocols of our annual conference. And so I want to say that the protocols, as we perfect them, will be under the guidance of district superintendents. And by that I mean that every local church will need to complete the work, the ministry plan as well, be responsible, whether pastor or a team in the local church, to make sure that it fulfills the protocols of their county and be ready in a written form to show the district superintendent that they have met the county guidelines as well. And so there is work for everyone. There is work for the pastor with the local church team, and ultimately coming to the district superintendent for certification. And then our conference team, with the help of many clergy and laypersons, will continue to perfect the protocols. And so I do hope that everyone will read the draft and begin to do the checklist, see what you need to do, check what the county is saying. If the county's saying you can't open yet, well, then keep working on the protocols for a future date. But it is a responsibility of those partners in those distinct ways. We want to do all that we can do to help. I know that district superintendents have worked very closely with pastors in their districts to provide assistance, and will continue to do so. I just checked about those 70 plus questions, Greg, that are left in the chat box. And I've been assured that we can save those questions and continue to answer them into the days to come. And so I'll make sure that we take all of those questions and provide an answer for them.
You are correct, Bishop. I've already copied and pasted all the questions so that they're saved.
Great, wonderful.
All right, that is the end of our Q&A time. I'll look to you, Bishop, to lead us.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank all of you, friends, pastors, local church lay leaders, for all the work that you have done. I've received these incredible reports and witnesses of how you have been able to reach out to people that have for some time not been attending church, and people you did not know, who, because you've been persistent, you've adapted to the virtual reality that we find ourselves in, you've been able to attract those people, and they have found, even through virtual means, the sense of safety and a place of sacredness and a connection with God through you. And so we thank you for that. I also want to express gratitude for pastors in communities where there isn't the broadband possibility to do the virtual work. And they've done some incredibly pastoral things. I know of a pastor who will call a church member who needs his presence and will say, I will be there at such a time, and drives up to their driveway or in front of their home, and through the window has a phone conversation with them to deal with their sense of isolation and loneliness and the need for pastoral care. That's quite incredible. Pastors and lay people who are taking the pastor's sermon house to house and leaving it at the door. Others who are taking gifts of materials for our children from our churches and our communities. Incredible care in your ministry. I am so very grateful to you. I also want to express gratitude to the teams that have helped us all along this process. I want to thank the pastors who on short notice helped us, the executive team and myself, our conference lay leader, determine whether we should close our churches. I'm thankful to the team that helped us determine what we would do in terms of daycares and preschools and wrote the protocols that we have distributed. The churches that helped us look at the drive-in protocols and that possibility of opening up in that way and took the risk to test them for us. And I'm grateful for the 8 churches, pastors and lay people who right now are helping us with the protocols for relaunching worship, 4 of whom shall test those protocols this Sunday and then test them again. The other 4 will test them again the following Sunday, all for the benefit of the whole, for our great connectional family. Thank you for that hard work. I do want you to know that our extended cabinet, which is our district superintendents, our executive staff, our director of communications, our conference lay leader, we meet together every Monday morning, starting at 8:30 as your response team to COVID-19. I want to thank these colleagues for their persevering work, for their conscientious work, for their commitment to you as we work together to sustain and support this great annual conference and above all, the ministry that God has called us to. Next week, we'll have another gathering of this kind, and I'll invite Selby to let us know about that webinar next week. God bless you all.
Blessings, Bishop, and blessings to each of you as we prepare to end our day and our time together. We will be gathering next Wednesday, the 17th, to a panel discussion moderated by George, who will help us hear from all of the people from the 4 churches, their designees who have tested these protocols this coming Sunday. And we'll have another discussion as well in time for question and answer. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the webinar page. And I think we'll post it as well on the COVID page. There have been some quick questions around resources posted on the COVID page of the conference site. And I will just say that it was always our goal to push people to the national, state, and county public health information sites and not to be an aggregate for all of the information coming out. So we will certainly keep updating you with this now current information, but do encourage you, as have Bishop and George throughout the webinar, to please double check your context. We're so happy you're here, and we thank you so much for participating in this beautiful connection that carries us across 2 states and innumerable contexts. So I just give great blessings and thanks to George, to Bishop, to Craig, and to Tua, who keeps everything going, and wish you all very well until we meet again. Thank you.